On Christmas while I was hospitalized, my parents slammed the door on my 10-year-old son. "This is just for family," my mom said. He walked home alone with a bag of gifts he bought using his own allowance. When I found out, I stayed silent and acted calmly. 3 hours later, they were calling me nonstop. On Christmas Day, my parents shut the door right in my 10-year-old son Ethan's face. And my mother actually told him that this year was for family only, like he didn't count. He ended up walking home by himself, carrying a bag stuffed with presents he'd bought using his own allowance. And when I learned what happened, I didn't raise my voice or explode the way people might expect. Instead, I stayed calm and quietly made a few decisions in my head. And about 3 hours later, my phone started lighting up with missed calls from them nonstop. That morning, though, I was still stuck in the hospital when the nanny called me, because I'd been there for 3 days already, hooked up to 4 fluids and meds after a bad allergic reaction knocked me flat. It wasn't life-threatening or anything dramatic like that, but it was serious enough that the doctors refused to let me go until the swelling went down and all the tests came back clear. I figured I'd be released the next day or maybe the day after, so I was already feeling guilty for not being home with Ethan on Christmas, even though we tried to handle it as best we could. The nanny was solid and dependable. I'd left her a whole list of things to do, and Ethan had sworn up and down he'd be totally fine, especially since he was excited about delivering the gifts he'd picked out himself. So when the nanny called that morning, I honestly thought it was just a routine check-in. She started talking slowly, like she was struggling to find the right words, and then told me that Ethan had put on his Christmas sweater, gathered up the bag of presents he'd wrapped himself, and asked if she could drive him over to my parents' place. I'd already told her before that it was okay since they lived just a few blocks away. She explained that she stayed in the car while he ran up to the front door. And then her voice changed and she said she thought something had gone wrong. According to her, my mom opened the door. Ethan was standing there smiling and holding the bag, wishing her a Merry Christmas and starting to say he had gifts for everyone. And my mother looked at him on the porch in the freezing cold and told him it was family only this year before closing the door in his face. I honestly thought I must have misunderstood, so I asked the nanny to repeat herself just to be sure. She said he stood there for a few seconds, then slowly walked back to the car without saying much, just gripping the bag the whole ride home. About 10 minutes later, he walked into my hospital room with the nanny right behind him, his cheeks red from the cold and his face wearing that confused look kids get when they're trying to make sense of something that doesn't feel right. He handed me the bag and quietly said that Grandma didn't want company, and that was all he could manage to say. The bag was still full, packed with small gifts he'd carefully chosen for everyone, including my mother, my father, my brother Mark, Mark's wife, and even their kids, each one wrapped in crinkly red paper with his handwriting on every tag. I sat there for a while just watching Ethan play a game on my tablet, and I didn't call or text anyone. There was no screaming, no tears, just this strange icy clarity settling in that I hadn't felt in years. After about 3 hours, I finally picked up my phone and sent a single message saying I wouldn't be paying Mark's rent anymore. With no explanation, no warnings, and no extra words. The first call came 3 minutes later, then another, and I ignored them all, flipped my phone to Do Not Disturb, and set it face down on the side table. A month earlier, my parents had come to me panicking because Mark was about to be evicted after falling 2 months behind on rent, and they said he and his wife were going through something. Whatever that was supposed to mean. They told me it would destroy their kids' Christmas if they had to move. And instead of asking, they begged me to help. I didn't want to, but I caved, paid the back rent, and even set up automatic monthly payments after they promised it would only be temporary. By that point, I'd spent more money cleaning up their messes over the past year than I had on myself, and now my own son, who did absolutely nothing wrong, was being told he wasn't family. I hit the nurse call button and told her I wanted to leave early. And even though she hesitated and asked if I was sure, I said yes without blinking. I got dressed, signed the paperwork, and walked out, waving off her offer to call a cab. The nanny was still waiting in the hallway with Ethan, looking nervous, while he looked like he was trying hard not to ask what was happening. I thanked her, paid her for the day, told her she could head home, took the car keys from her hand, and walked out with my son. We weren't going back to our place just yet, because instead we were heading to my parents' house. The drive was quiet, with Ethan sitting in the passenger seat holding the bag of gifts between his feet like it was fragile, glancing out the window every so often, probably wondering what I was about to do. And I didn't explain because I wasn't even fully sure myself until I pulled up and saw the driveway packed with cars. Mark's SUV was there, my dad's truck, and even my brother's-in-law's car, which made the whole family-only excuse look even worse. The yard was covered in decorations like always, with plastic candy canes lining the walkway, an inflatable Santa slumped against a snowman, and that ridiculous glowing reindeer with one half-deflated antler, making the place look warm and welcoming if you didn't know better. I parked across the street and told Ethan we were just going in for a minute, and he didn't argue or ask questions, just said okay and followed me. I knocked once, and my mom opened the door smiling like she expected someone else until she saw us, and her expression dropped instantly. She asked what we were doing there. I told her we needed to talk, and when her eyes flicked down to Ethan and back up at me without inviting us in or opening the door wider, I stepped past her anyway and told Ethan to wait just inside. The living room was a mess of wrapping paper, half-eaten cookies on plates, and the sound of my brother's kids yelling down the hall, and my dad came in from the kitchen holding a drink and giving me that same surprised, irritated look. I asked them why they sent my son away, and after a brief moment of discomfort, my mom claimed they didn't know he was coming and had planned to keep it just family, speaking quickly like she wanted to move past it. I asked if Mark's in-laws somehow counted as family under that rule, and she looked away, while my dad said Ethan shouldn't have shown up without notice and that it put them in an awkward spot, adding that the nanny should have asked first. I looked at my dad and reminded him that Ethan is 10 years old, just 10, and he showed up with a bag overflowing with gifts he'd picked out himself. My mom immediately started explaining how they never meant to hurt his feelings, how things had been stressful lately, and how they weren't expecting anyone to come by, insisting over and over that it wasn't personal. I asked her straight up what part of slamming the door in a child's face wasn't personal, and instead of answering that, she turned around and asked me like none of it had just happened, whether I was really serious about stopping Mark's rent payments. I told her it was already done and that the message had gone out hours earlier, and the whole room went dead silent. After that, my dad jumped in, clearly trying to take control, asking if I'd really thought it through and whether I understood what this would do to Mark's family. I told him I understood exactly what it meant. That's when Mark finally walked in, full of righteous anger, demanding to know how I could do this on Christmas, reminding me that I'd promised to help and warning that his kids would suffer. Yet not once did he ask if Ethan was okay or say he was sorry. My mom started raising her voice, going on about how family is supposed to support each other, how they'd help me when I needed it, and how cruel I was being. So I calmly told her that leaving a 10-year-old standing alone on a porch in the cold was what I'd call cruel. She snapped back that I was being dramatic, that I always twist things, that I turn everything into an excuse to play the victim, while my dad told me I needed to stop and think because I was punishing the wrong people. That's when I looked over at Ethan, still standing by the door holding the gift bag tightly with both hands, not moving an inch, and I knew I was done. I said we were finished, turned to him, and asked if he was ready to go, and when he nodded, we walked out without another word. Once we were back in the car, I asked him if he still wanted to deliver the presents, and he quietly said no, that he just wanted to go home. Then after a pause he asked if they were still our family, and I told him we were still a family, just the two of us, and that was more than enough. We spent the rest of Christmas acting like nothing had happened, and since Ethan didn't want to talk about it, I didn't push, instead making chocolate chip pancakes shaped like snowmen for dinner and sitting with him on the couch watching a movie we'd both seen 100 times. I kept watching him out of the corner of my eye, waiting for tears or questions or confusion, but none of it came, at least not then, and he just leaned against me quietly until he fell asleep. I didn't check my phone until after that, and when I did, I saw message after message, first from my mom and then from my dad, starting with panic asking what I meant about not paying Mark's rent anymore, telling me this wasn't the time for games and that it was Christmas and we needed to talk, followed by guilt about him being my brother with kids and how I didn't understand how hard things were for him, reminding me of how we'd always supported each other and everything they'd done for me when I was struggling, and finally turning into anger, accusing me of making everything about myself, calling what I was doing cruel, and saying Ethan shouldn't have shown up unannounced and that it was my fault. I put my phone back on Do Not Disturb, set it face down on the nightstand, and didn't reply because walking away had already said everything I needed to say. The next day my dad left a voicemail which I listened to without answering, where he said they were disappointed in how I was handling things, that I was overreacting emotionally, and that I was using Ethan as a weapon, before ending with the line they always fall back on, reminding me that they helped me when I needed it. That part hit because it was true at least once. For years earlier when my SUV broke down during an awful month when Ethan had just ended up in urgent care after a bad fall at school and the medical bills alone drained me, and when the mechanic said the transmission repair would be $3,000, I nearly broke down. My parents offered to help and I accepted, thanking them endlessly, but they never let it go, turning it into an unspoken contract I never agreed to, where every time Mark messed up or my parents overspent, I got the call or the guilt-laced reminder, sometimes subtle, sometimes not, always implying I owed them forever. What made it worse was how much more I'd already given, covering rent, groceries, bills, even Mark's car payment once when he forgot it was on autopay, sending him hundreds of dollars just to get him through the week more times than I could count, all while my parents encouraged it and called it keeping the family together. That night I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and pulled up every bank statement I had, going line by line through every dollar I'd sent Mark, every bill I'd paid for my parents, every bailout I'd handled, and after nearly 3 hours the total made my stomach drop, over $18,000 in just the last 2 years, not even counting the $1,200 from my Christmas bonus that had gone toward Mark's rent the month before. I added $3,000 more to the number for the transmission just to be sure, then logged into my bank account and scheduled a transfer for exactly $3,000 to my parents, no more and no less, typing for the transmission in the memo before hitting send. I didn't add anything else or explain myself, and while I expected an explosion, it didn't come that night or the next day, just silence, which worried me more than yelling ever could because it meant they were regrouping. I knew Mark was probably blowing up their phones about his rent and his kids and how he'd counted on me, but for the first time in years that wasn't my problem anymore, and they had nothing left to hold over me, not the transmission, not the guilt, not the past, because I'd paid it back in full. It took 3 full days before I heard anything, a long, deliberate silence that spoke louder than words. And then, right on schedule, a message finally came in from my mom. The message from my mom was short and cold, saying they'd received the money and that it wasn't necessary but thank you, with no warmth, no apology, and not a single mention of Ethan, just a clean acknowledgement like I was some stranger who'd finally settled an account. 5 minutes later another message came through, almost like the first one had just been setting the stage, asking if I was planning to start paying Mark's rent again next month or if this was still about what happened on Christmas, and that phrase, still about what happened on Christmas, made me stop cold. I actually laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because they really thought this was about one bad day or a simple misunderstanding, like a kid showing up with a bag of presents and being turned away wouldn't stick with him forever, or with me. I didn't answer, and a few hours later my dad tried instead with a longer message that somehow managed to be worse, saying they knew I was hurt but Mark was in a fragile place and that if anything happened to his family, eviction or worse, it would be on me, followed by a line about hoping I'd do the right thing. Just like that, I was apparently responsible for a grown man's life, ignoring the fact that Mark is 37, can't hold a steady job, and treats budgeting like a phone call to me when his money runs out, and ignoring how much I'd already done. Then something happened that caught me completely off guard because Mark's wife reached out to me directly, even though we've never been close and she's always been the kind of person who fades into the background. Her message was simple and honest, saying she didn't agree with what they did to Ethan and that she told Mark it was wrong but he wouldn't listen, and then after a short pause she added that he'd lied, telling my parents he was only 1 month behind when in reality it was 3 and he hadn't paid rent since October. I read that message 3 times because I couldn't believe it, realizing they'd come to me panicked and desperate while he was already drowning, wrapping the truth in urgency to guilt me into fixing it like I always had. When I checked my banking app again, it hit me that my payments only covered November and December, that October had been ignored completely, and they were counting on me to jump in without asking questions. Sitting there staring at the screen, I finally admitted something I'd avoided for years, which was that none of them ever really saw Ethan as part of the family the way they saw Mark's kids, because he was tolerated when it was easy but never chosen or protected. Not long after that, Mark messaged me himself for the first time in weeks, accusing me of stirring things up with our parents and calling me immature, reminding me that his kids needed stability and that they were counting on me, telling me to act like family. That word again, family, the one they throw around whenever they need something, when it really means sacrifice on my end and silence about the double standards. I didn't answer him either, and instead I forwarded the entire message chain from my parents and Mark straight to his wife, adding one line saying I was sorry she was stuck in the middle but I was done for good. She didn't reply right away, but later she reacted with a thumbs up. And that was enough for me to know she either understood or was just as worn out as I was. They all expected me to fold eventually, to let guilt outweigh my son's pain. But for the first time in my life I felt completely sure of myself, knowing they didn't hold the power anymore, and that the next time things fell apart they'd have to look somewhere else. A full week passed before I heard from them again, 7 days of silence that felt calculated, and then my mom sent a voice message just over 3 minutes long that I ignored at first because I wasn't interested in excuses while Ethan sat nearby building Lego towers. Later that night, after he went to bed, I finally listened, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee as she sighed and slipped into that calm, reasonable tone she uses when she's about to justify herself. She said she hoped I'd had time to calm down and wasn't letting emotions damage something as important as family, admitted things got a little out of hand like it was equal on all sides, and then reminded me, just like always, of how much they'd done for me when things were hard. Before she finished, she added that Mark was doing the best he could and didn't have the same opportunities one did, saying it wasn't his fault things were harder for him. And that part hit deeper than anything else because I'd heard it my whole life. Mark needs more patience, more chances, more understanding, while it never mattered that I was the one working nonstop, skipping holidays, giving up vacations, and saying no to everything just to keep things together, all while being expected to do it quietly and gratefully. And through all of it, Ethan was never really part of the equation at all. They loved the idea of being grandparents, the fun parts like posting birthday photos online and making a check-in call once a month, but when it came to the hard stuff, the awkward moments, actually showing up and loving Ethan without conditions, they failed him completely and didn't even realize they were doing it. I didn't reply to my mom's message because I didn't need to, since my mind was already made up and her words only confirmed it. The next morning I went through everything piece by piece, canceling the automatic rent payments for Mark and removing my parents from every account they'd been using. From streaming services to cloud storage to a grocery delivery app I'd once left open for them after an emergency. I pulled up the spreadsheet again, the one where I'd tracked all the money I'd spent over the years on rent, utilities, groceries, emergencies, and even that transmission, and as I stared at the total it finally clicked that they weren't just emptying my bank account, they were draining my peace too. I sat down and wrote one last message, telling them that going forward I wouldn't be providing any financial support of any kind, including for Mark or anything connected to him, that I'd paid back what I owed, and that if Ethan wasn't welcome in their home then neither was I. It was simple, direct, and honest, and after sending it to both of them I shut my phone off. 3 days later Mark broke the silence with a voicemail I didn't answer but listened to while brushing my teeth, his voice shaky as he accused me of being stuck on what happened and claimed I'd turned our parents against him, which was laughable considering they still treated him like gold. He went on about his kids being scared, rent being overdue, and how this was going to ruin their lives, before finishing with a line that sealed it for me, saying I was lucky our parents helped me when I fell apart but that I ran the second he needed help. That was my limit, so I sent one final message telling him I'd paid them back every dollar and then some and that we were done, before blocking his number along with my parents and every backup they had. It felt strange at first and I kept checking my phone like something was supposed to pull me back in. But nothing happened, no crisis, no emergency, just quiet, and that quiet felt good. That night Ethan and I made a late dinner of frozen waffles piled with whipped cream and syrup, and when he asked if we could put our little Christmas tree back up just for fun I said yes, and we decorated it with mismatched ornaments, old candy canes, and a crooked paper star he'd made in 2nd grade. He looked at me then, not sad or angry, just curious, and asked if we weren't seeing Grandma and Grandpa anymore, and I told him we weren't, maybe not ever, and he just nodded and went back to fixing the star, saying he liked it better here anyway, and I told him I did too. It's been a month now with no texts, no calls, no apologies, just silence, and it's been the most peaceful 30 days I can remember in years. I thought guilt would show up, that I'd wake up wondering if I'd gone too far or broken some unspoken rule, but it never did, and instead I felt this unexpected freedom from late-night calls asking me to cover one more thing, from group texts trying to rope me into obligations disguised as family events, and from pretending everything was fine when resentment had been building forever. It's not just the quiet, it's the clarity, because now when I look around I see my son, our small imperfect home, a bank account not bleeding from other people's choices, and weekends that actually belong to us. The biggest change is how I feel when I think about them, because I don't feel angry or sad or betrayed anymore. I just feel finished, like the cord's been cut and I'm not bleeding from it. The only update I've gotten about them came from an old neighbor who mentioned running into my mom at the store and said she looked worn out and overwhelmed, adding that Mark was staying with them again for a while, and I didn't ask for details because I already knew how that story went. Mark still doesn't have steady work, his wife is probably barely holding on, my parents are covering for him again, and they're likely telling anyone who'll listen that I'm cold or ungrateful, but I honestly don't care anymore. They can explain my absence however they want and carry Mark's weight until it crushes them, because I'm not in that mess anymore. And for the first time I see the truth clearly, which is that they never helped me because they believed in me, they helped because they expected permanent loyalty in return. I did repay them though, again and again in ways that nearly broke me, and then I stopped even going so far as to mail them a real receipt listing every transfer, every bill, every grocery run, with a note at the bottom that said account settled and no remaining balance. I never heard back, which was fine because the point wasn't a response, it was closure. And now I'm not angry or sad, I'm just free. Ethan's been thriving too, lighter and more confident, and he doesn't ask about them anymore, not because I told him not to, but because I think he understands that I chose us. These days we've got this thing we do every Sunday night where we cook something new together, turning the kitchen into a loud, messy disaster zone full of mistakes and laughter. And the best part is that nobody ever gets turned away at the door.